Today I just want to cover something which comes up quite often in UE5, and that's audio inputs. So to get started, all I've done is created a very simple material with one parameter and a Fresnel, and I've created an actor as well. I'm just going to start populating this actor and just add in a sphere, and I'm going to add the material that I created to this sphere. Essentially what we want is some audio inputs to drive this, and we also want a Niagara system as well. I'm going to drag this into the world. In the world, all I've got is directional light and a sky atmosphere. Just change the colour a bit, make it look a bit more funky. And we're going to go ahead and create a Niagara system. I'm just going to create a fountain, helps with the setup a little bit. I'm going to call this the sound system. Great, so essentially what we want to do with this, let's go ahead and pop it into the world. Oh, just going to change my camera speed. Cool, I'm going to pop it inside the sphere. We're going to change this later on. It's not too important to have it too precise for right now, but for right this second we just want it inside the middle of the sphere. We're just going to take out the gravity force, and we are also going to change the cone angle of the velocity to 360, so we're shooting in all directions. I'm going to bump up the drag to 5. We are also going to increase the sphere radius to 50. Yeah, that looks cool. We're not going to worry too much about these settings for right now. We're just going to change the cone axis to the velocity. You'll see why in the near future. And finally, we're just going to change the colour as well. We'll make it blue. Yeah, we'll go ahead and make that blue. Cool, so we can see we've just got some particles spawning in all different directions. Next thing we want to do is just create a Niagara module script, and we will call this fx_module. And essentially what a Niagara module script is an input and an output, or a set of inputs and a set of outputs, and they usually come from particles, and you can basically affect changes within them. So first thing we're going to do is grab out the velocity, and that's velocity of the particles, and an audio spectrum, and we're also going to get a normalized age as well. On the outputs, we want to also introduce a velocity. Essentially the goal of this particular module is to take a velocity, do something with it based on the audio spectrum, and then we're going to output a new velocity. I'm going to make a float which is 1.25, and I'm going to make another float which is 1. So the first float will be, so if we grab our velocity first and just break that into the vector, and grab our audio spectrum, we'll come back to what that float is in a second. Going to put our normalized age in the audio spectrum, and from the amplitude we're just going to do a multiply. So first we want to multiply our vector values, so if we create 3 multiplies and put each of the vector values into one of their multiplies, so we want a vector times an amplitude, doesn't matter which pins they're going, and then we want to times them all by 1.25. So 1.25 is basically the power factor that we're adding to the vector. Next we want to add, and again we do 3 different adds, 1, 2, 3, 1 for x, 1 for y, 1 for z, and these are basically going to be adding an offset of 1, so that was the second float that we've got. So we're timesing by 1.25 from the amplitude, and then we're adding 1 to each of the outputs from that. Don't necessarily have to worry too much about this. There's lots to learn on Niagara module scripts. It might not be something you come across too often. And then we'll make a vector to go back out, and that's to go back into the velocity. And so what we've done, we've times the initial velocity by the amplitude, and then we've added 1 onto that just as an offset. Just to show you what you can do, I'm just going to add a new local float, and that's going to be our x value. So you can see you've got a whole bunch of options here. Again, don't worry too much about them, just worry about naming it for now. So it's F2 in order to change the name. I'm going to set this one as X. I'm going to add another one and go through to make new common, and this one's going to be renamed to Y. And finally, you can just type in make and then go through a float, and that's going to be the Z. Okay, I'm just going to plug in each of those values. So X into the X, Y into the Y, and Z into the Z. And that just means if we want to look at a particular X value, then we can, and vice versa. In this particular video, I'm just going to show you how to add the velocity module. In fact, we've already added it onto our add velocity, if you remember. Next thing we need to do is just type in the name of your module, take off the tick for library only in the top right of the module, and add in your submaster mix default on the module itself. Master submix default. So we're getting the cone axis, which is the velocity, and we've got our FX module. So in order to test this, we need some sound, so we can just add some ambient sound into the environment. In fact, we'll go ahead and add an audio component onto our actor instead, and just pop in a sound that we want to use. So I've got a WAV file here. Just going to drop this in. And that'll play automatically. I'm just going to add in a player start as well, otherwise we'll be spawning quite far, won't be able to see the effect. And just on the velocity, I'm just going to bump this up a bit as well, 1000 to 2000, just so we can get a bit more of the effect. Come through and hit play. And we can see we're adding some velocity to our particles based on the sound that's coming out. So I'm just going to hit up the spawn rate a little bit, go to 500. You can put this into thousands if you like. If you go above 10,000, I'd probably suggest putting it on a GPU. Take the sphere radius down again just to 20. And that's kind of cool. It's more than what I'm going for. So it's a bit more impactful if you have a smaller radius that you come from to start off with. Okay, I'm going to change the colour a little bit. It's not very visible there. Just going to add 5 on the red. And on our scale colour, we're just going to take that out and we'll do scale by speed instead. So scale sprite is highest by speed. And on the max factor, we will pop in 5. And the minimum factor, 0.2. And the effect this will give us, it's a bit of a fire type explosion-y type effect. Kind of cool. It's good. Yep, like that. So the goal of this video is actually to give you tools so you can play around with these links yourself and get some cool effects. So the next thing we want to do is just going to take out the audio on that now that we've tested it, know that it works. And we want to start working on our blueprint itself. In order to do that, you need to go to your plugins, that's up at the top right in settings, and look for a module called Audio Synesthesia. This is free and provided in the engine, but it is unticked by default, so you just need to tick this and you may need to restart your engine as well. So once that's enabled, then essentially what we want to do is we want to look at changing the material and also performing some actions on the sound actor. So on sound and analysis, you should now have synesthesia NRT if you've got it enabled, and you can choose the best one for you. For this one, I'm going to cover the constant NRT. So onset is when a sound starts, and loudness is when you hit particular levels of sound. I want the constant NRT for this one. Essentially what this does is this analyses the track, looks at amplitude across the time period so that you can call on it basically, rather than having to read it in real time. And you want to drop in the sound in the NRT that we want to read. We can save that and create a variable inside our actor, as we call the NRT, and it's of type NRT. There are a few different options, just make sure you choose the constant QNRT option. And we create another variable and we'll call this the sound base. And choose the NRT option for our NRT. So the order that you do these things has to be quite specific. So first of all, before we get started on that, we'll just set up a dynamic material instance, and we'll choose our sound material that we created. This just means that we can affect it directly. This doesn't necessarily use the module, you can do this without it. We'll call this the material. And the next part is where we're going to start using the synesthesia module. So the audio is empty at the moment, that's how we want it to stay. And we want to choose to bind from audio playback percent. As and when there's any audio playing, this will then be called, and we're going to attach a function to it in a second. Next one we've got is the sound base. This is actually the wrong variable at the moment, need to go and change it on the variable. I just want to look up sound base. We want to set the sound on the audio component, and that's going to come from the sound base. The reason that we need to put it onto a sound base originally is because the sound base holds the duration of the track. So we're going to set the sound, and then from the sound base we'll get the duration, and we'll set this as a variable. We can create an event now from our bound event on the audio module. Just create a custom event, and we'll call this playing. We want to get the playback percent. First we want to make sure that we're playing the track. It's not playing by default because there's nothing attached there to start off with. And then on the playing, we'll go playback percent, and we're going to times that by the duration. That will give us a normalized value, and we'll promote that to a variable. We'll call the variable norm underscore sound, or norm underscore playtime. And from there we can use this value to get what we need to on the NRT. So from the NRT, just look up normalized. We'll get normalized channel, constant Q at time. And we'll plug in our normalized value, and this will give us the amplitude at that particular time. We can use a for each loop. And then this will give us an amount that based on the amplitude that we can then use to set whatever we want in the blueprint. So I'm going to grab my material because it's a dynamic material instance, and we set a scalar. And we'll times this as well. Times it by 3 to start off with. And we compile and save. You can move that over slightly. So we're creating our dynamic material instance, set the sound on our audio component from the sound base. We're going to bind to the audio component, get the duration, set the duration, play it, and then get the normalized value, and from the normalized value we then get the element that we want. So here we are in the world. You can see that the duration isn't being set because the sound base has not been set, so we need to make sure that we set that manually on the sound base, otherwise we're not going to be able to set the sound. Okay, and one more thing, just on the NRT I put the wrong option in, just make sure you've got the NRT in as well. There we go, we can see that our Niagara effect is working well. We're getting too big of effect on our parameter value, so we're just going to bump this up a little bit to 500. I didn't include the name as well, that would help, so I'm just going to call this power. Going to go ahead and take out the sound system that's in the world just so I can look at the mesh. Yep, you can see that the power is now increasing. Probably a little bit too much. I'm going to go back to 3, see where we're at. And we can see that it is changing. It's not quite changing enough. I'm just going to go ahead and increase this to 20. And that's a bit more of the effect that we're looking for. I'm going to grab out our sphere now and get the relative scale 3D, or set the relative scale 3D even. I'm going to pull from there and directly into the relative scale 3D, and we can see that our blueprint is being sized based on the amplitude that's coming from our sound. It's not really increasing very much, so I'm just going to times this amount by 2, see what that looks like. And we can see that looks a little bit better. Just going to add the Niagara particle system back in now and set the system to our sound system, and that should all work as before. You can see that our mesh isn't quite big enough, so I'm just going to bump up the size very slightly, bump it up to 4. Great, that's getting much closer to the look that we're going for. It seems that the mesh is scaling a little bit too much, it's a little bit too jittery. This might be the look that you're going for. I think what I want to do is just sort of smooth it out a little bit. It'd be nice to sort of show you how to do that as well. So what we want to do is we want to basically use a vInterp2, and that's basically where you smooth. It's a little bit like a lerp, except it's done on the world delta seconds, where you just can pull in the world delta seconds and then choose your interpretation speed. I'm just going to set the spawn probability and make a user parameter, so that if we're not playing any music, we won't be spawning any items. I'm going to change the name of this to just spawn. I'm going to come off on Niagara and set float parameter. Our parameter name is spawn, and we're going to come straight out of the array element. You just see that working there. Not getting quite as many particles, but the louder they are, the more particles we get. Cool again. So the next thing we want to do is just stop being quite so jittery. So you could use an fInterp off the original element, but I think because we're going back into a vector, it makes more sense to get the relative scale 3D, and then we'll put both of these into a vInterp. So our current will be in the relative scale 3D, and our target is what's coming out of this variable. Delta times is world seconds, delta world seconds, and the interp speed will set to 2. So the lower the interpret speed, the slower it happens. That's a little bit better. I'm going to bring it down a little bit more. Just go for 1. Yeah, that's much nicer. I'm actually going to go a little bit lower. I'll just go to 0.1. Want it really slow. And I'm going to set the multiplier to 0.8. Cool, that looks good. So just to recap what we've done. So we've created 2 modules, one for the Niagara effect and one for a blueprint. And essentially the next thing to do is just to see what you can create with it.